Commander Richard Antrim, U.S. Navy. Peru, Indiana. The heat in the prison camp at Makassar was suffocating, thick, humid, and heavy with despair. It was April 1942, and thousands of Allied prisoners of war, captured after the fall of the Netherlands, East Indies, lived under the constant shadow of brutality. The Japanese guards ruled through fear, and every man knew that even a glance at the wrong moment could invite death. That morning, the prisoners were assembled in the yard, 2,700 gaunt faces watching in silence as the Japanese guards' rage erupted. A naval officer, weak and exhausted, had been accused of some trivial offense. The guards struck him again and again with a club, his fury escalating to madness. Each blow cracked through the air, the officer collapsing under the violence. The camp held its breath. No one dared to move. Then, from among the ranks, stepped Lieutenant Richard Antrim of the United States Navy. Calm but resolute, he approached the enraged guard, risking his life with every step. He spoke quietly, pleading for restraint, trying to reason with a man beyond reason. The guard, momentarily stunned by such defiance, hesitated. The other Japanese soldiers gathered, their commander watching as preparations for a public beating began. Antrim stood between the victim and the mob. When the guard resumed the assault, striking 15 brutal blows and kicking the fallen officer until he lay unconscious and bleeding, Antrim made a choice that silenced the entire camp. He stepped forward, and in clear view of the Japanese troops and thousands of Allied prisoners, indicated that he would take the remainder of the punishment himself. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The Japanese guards froze in disbelief, uncertain how to react. Then from the crowd of prisoners came a rising roar, a sound of astonishment and defiance. In that moment, one man's courage broke through the fear that had smothered them all. The guard lowered his weapon. The beating stopped. The officer's life was spared, and though Antrim had risked his own, the Japanese, stunned by his self-sacrifice, did not strike him. In the days that followed, the camp changed. The guards' cruelty eased, and a new respect spread among captors and captives alike. Lieutenant, later Commander, Richard Antrim had done more than save a life that day. He had reminded thousands of broken men that honor, compassion, and courage could survive even in the darkest prison. His quiet defiance and fearless leadership reflected not only the finest traditions of the United States Navy, but the enduring strength of the human spirit. Private First Class Thomas E. Atkins, Campobello, South Carolina. The night was black and restless on the Via Verde Trail, a narrow, treacherous road that wound through the mountains of Luzon. On the ridge outside the perimeter of the 1st Platoon's defenses, 3 men, Private First Class Thomas E. Atkins and 2 companions, kept their post, the jungle around them eerily still. Then, just after 3 a.m., the stillness shattered. 2 Japanese companies erupted from the darkness, their attack crashing through the night with a storm of rifle and machine gun fire, grenades and TNT charges, the air filled with the sharp crack of bullets and the deep thunder of explosions. Atkins was hit, a deep wound tearing through him, but he didn't falter. His 2 comrades fell beside him, killed instantly, leaving him alone to face the assault. Bleeding and in agony, Atkins steadied his rifle and fired into the enemy ranks. Round after round he returned fire with grim precision. When the first wave broke, he could have crawled back for help, but he didn't. He stayed, knowing another attack would come. Moments later, a Japanese machine gun opened up from just 20 yards away, trying to drive him from his foxhole. The tracers slashed through the darkness, but Atkins held his ground. Again and again the enemy charged, grenades bursting around him, shrapnel kicking up dirt and smoke, but for 4 relentless hours he fought on. By dawn, the slope before him was littered with 13 enemy dead. Atkins had fired every round his small outpost possessed, nearly 400 shots, using 3 rifles in succession until each jammed beyond repair. Only then, during a brief lull, did he crawl back through the mud and blood to the American lines, exhausted and weak from blood loss. He was finally persuaded to accept medical treatment, but even as he waited for aid, his vigilance didn't waver. When a Japanese soldier slipped through the perimeter, Atkins seized a nearby rifle and shot him dead. Minutes later, as medics prepared to carry him back, he spotted a group of enemy soldiers moving up behind the platoon's position. Propping himself up on the litter, he opened fire once more, driving them into retreat. When the sun rose over the Villa Verde trail, Atkins's foxhole stood as a testament to endurance and courage. Alone, wounded, and surrounded, he had held the ridge for hours against overwhelming odds, his defiance helping his comrades maintain their lines against a numerically superior force. Private First Class Thomas E. Atkins' steadfast bravery and refusal to yield turned the tide of the battle that night. In his determination to fight on, even when all others had fallen, he embodied the indomitable spirit of a soldier who would not surrender. Not to fear, not to pain, and not to the enemy. Major Kenneth D. Bailey, U.S. Marine Corps, Pawnee, Oklahoma. The night was heavy with heat and fear on Guadalcanal. Rain clung to the jungle leaves like sweat, and the air thrummed with the distant hum of insects and war. It was September 12, 1942, and Henderson Field, that patch of dirt and steel so bitterly contested, lay under the shadow of the Japanese. Major Kenneth D. Bailey, commanding Company C of the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, had no illusions about what was coming. His men had fought through the previous night, a savage hand-to-hand struggle that had left the company bloodied and broken. Yet by dawn Bailey had already reorganized what remained, welding together the exhausted fragments of his unit into a fighting force once again. By mid-morning, they were positioned as the battalion reserve, holding the fragile line between the main defensive perimeter and the airfield that could not fall. Then the first signs of disaster appeared. On the right flank, a gap had opened in the main line. Through it, the enemy poured, disciplined, relentless, determined to reach the airfield. Bailey saw it instantly. Without hesitation, he moved. Shouting above the crash of mortar fire, he gathered what men he could and charged into the breach. Grenades burst around them. Tracers stitched the trees, but Bailey's voice cut through the chaos. Firm, defiant, commanding. His counterattack drove the Japanese back, closing the gap before the enemy could widen it. Even as he stabilized the flank, the full weight of the Japanese assault fell on the Marines. The enemy came in waves, shouting, firing, pressing closer with bayonets and grenades. Bailey's company became the thin edge of resistance between Henderson Field and annihilation. Under the glare of exploding shells, he directed every gun, every rifle, every scrap of ammunition to hold the line. When the main body of the battalion was forced to withdraw under the pounding of superior forces, Bailey refused to give ground. Exposed to the open fire, he moved among his men, rallying them, covering the retreat with calculated bursts of fire. His presence steadied them, a calm figure amid madness, leading from the front. A shell fragment tore into his head, sending him staggering. Blood ran into his eyes, but he would not fall back. Binding the wound as best he could, he pressed on, helping reorganize scattered Marines and extending the reserve position to the left, where the Japanese were probing for another weak point. Hour after hour, through smoke and screams, he fought beside his men. The combat dissolved into brutal close quarters, bayonets flashing, rifle butts swinging, knives and fists and courage clashing in the dark. For 10 relentless hours, Bailey led them in the melee, shouting orders, firing his weapon, striking with his own hands when the ammunition ran dry. By the time the sun rose over Guadalcanal, the raiders still held. The Japanese assault had broken against them like a wave against stone. Henderson Field, that precious lifeline of the Pacific Campaign, was safe, but at terrible cost. Major Kenneth D. Bailey had given everything: his courage, his command, and finally his life. Yet in his final hours, his indomitable spirit had transformed weary men into a wall of defiance. His leadership, carved in blood and resolve, had saved the field, and perhaps the island itself. In the annals of the Marine Corps, Bailey's name would forever be spoken with reverence. A leader who stood his ground in the face of overwhelming odds, and whose final act of valor turned the tide at one of the Pacific's darkest moments. Which of these stories inspired you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe.